A young black boy from a poor African village reaches the Pope, and the request he makes leaves everyone in shock. Kofi's story is one of those that goes straight to the heart and inspires us to never give up on our dreams. From an early age, Kofi learned that the sky was the only place no one could ever take from him. Up on the high rock behind the village, he would lie down alone, staring at the deep blue above, a crumpled newspaper clipping tucked under his shirt. The paper was yellowed and torn at the edges, but the image it held never lost its power. A man in white robes, arms lifted, smiling at a crowd. The Pope, Kofi, couldn't explain why. He just knew that ever since he could remember, he had dreamed of meeting that man, to see his face up close, to look into his eyes, and say something he didn't yet have the words to say. Sometimes his eyes filled with tears, and he didn't know why. The village was dry, small, and forgotten. The red dust clung to the air and skin alike. Some days, all you could hear were birds and the distant groans of women hauling water. Other days, you heard screams. Kofi had little. No father, no mother, no siblings, not even a bed of his own. He slept wherever someone offered space and shared whatever scraps he had with younger kids. No one knew his exact age, but people said he was about 10. But Kofi had something no one else in that place did. He saw beyond. And whenever someone asked what he was thinking, he'd answer softly, "The sky." It wasn't time or hunger that made Kofi grow up too soon. It was what he witnessed with his own eyes at the age of 5. His older brother, Kojo, was everything he had. Strong, proud, a boy with quick words and a wide smile. He worked unloading supply trucks near the road, where foreign soldiers passed on military missions. One day, a white soldier accused Kojo of stealing a knife. They said he ran, said he had something hidden in his pants, but no one let Kojo speak. The soldiers didn't ask, didn't check. They just came, 3 armed men with cold eyes, and dragged him out of the small school where he helped with chores. Kojo fought. He screamed. And Kofi, hiding behind a pile of wood, saw everything. The fists, the shouting, the blood. Kojo begging for help. People standing and watching. And boots, thick with dirt, crushing his body into ground. And then silence. When the soldiers left, all that remained was Kojo's body on the ground. A thin trail of blood leaking from his ear. And Kofi, far too young to understand and far too old to forget. That was the day something inside Kofi shattered. And at the same time, something was born. From that moment on, he avoided uniforms. And every time he saw someone with pale skin, his chest tightened. Except for one white face, the one in the yellowed newspaper photo. The Pope. It was on a hot and heavy morning, when the world seemed to shift. Kofi was sweeping the dirt floor of the village school when he heard the Catholic missions radio announce, in a solemn voice, that a new pope had just been elected in Rome. A new man in white, a new face. Kofi ran to the local priest and begged him to repeat the news. And when he heard it again, he was certain. This was it. This was his calling. He didn't know how or when, but something in his chest told him, deeply, this was the moment. "I'm going to him," he whispered, as if making a vow. From that day forward, something changed in his eyes. A flame that wouldn't go out, not with dust, not with hunger, not even with the laughter of others. Because yes, they laughed. A lot. "You? Meet the Pope?" An older boy sneered. "You don't even know where Rome is." "Maybe he'll fly there with the angels," another joked. The others roared with laughter. But Kofi didn't flinch. He kept looking at the sky, kept practicing foreign words in secret, kept drawing the path to that great plaza, the one with columns, with sticks in the dirt, from a picture book he once found. In that story told through images, there was a massive square, a golden throne, a ring, men kneeling, and always at the center, the Pope. That was where Kofi wanted to go. In the village, there was only one white man who didn't scare Kofi, Father Giacomo, an older Italian priest with pale skin, thinning hair, and a soft smile. He'd lived there many years, spoke little, but saw everything. He was the first to notice something had changed in the boy. "You've been praying more lately, Kofi," he said one day after Mass. "I'm learning how to talk to God for real." The priest smiled. "And what do you tell him?" "That I want to meet the Pope." Father Giacomo knelt so they were eye to eye, then asked gently, "Why?" Kofi hesitated. His gaze wandered. "Because he needs to hear something." "And what is it?" The boy looked him straight in the eyes, steady and clear. "I don't know how to say it yet, but I will. One day." Father Giacomo placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder. He didn't say a word, but he understood. This wasn't a child's fantasy. It was a mission, and missions, the priest knew well, are often born in the least expected places. That night, while other boys laughed and tossed stones into the lake, Kofi climbed the high rock again. The sky was dark. The stars were sharp. He opened his Bible and pulled out the worn clipping, stared at the smiling face of the old Pope, then looked up at the sky. "Wait for me," he whispered. "I'm coming." And there, alone, unseen, Kofi closed his eyes and repeated a phrase in Latin that he still didn't fully understand, but practiced every day like a sacred secret. "Renuntia ut primum papam habeamus coloris mei." The voice was low, but maybe the sky heard it. Morning light poured into the slits of the small mission's windows. The smell of wet earth still lingered in the air, and roosters crowed in the distance, greeting the new day with their usual tireless repetition. Kofi had been awake for hours, sitting in the shade of the mango tree, his knees dusty and a broken pencil between his fingers. He tried to copy the words from an old book he had found in a forgotten box behind the altar. It was a strange book, full of words that didn't sound like the village language, nor like the English he was learning at the makeshift school. These were ancient words, beautiful, almost like a song. "What are you doing out here so early?" asked a quiet voice from behind the leaves. It was the priest. Father Giacomo walked slowly, his old sandals kicking up dust with each step. In one hand, he carried a bag of fruit, and around his neck hung a small crucifix. Kofi looked up unsmiling and pointed at the book. "I'm trying to understand these words." The priest knelt beside him and gently took the book. "Latin," he murmured. "It's been a long time since I've seen this one." "Is that the language the Pope speaks?" "Among others, but yes, the Vatican still uses Latin often." "Why?" Kofi looked away, thinking. Then, in a voice even quieter than usual, he asked, "Can you teach me?" Father Giacomo looked surprised. "Latin?" Kofi nodded. He didn't explain why, didn't ask for a specific phrase. He just sat there, waiting for an answer. The priest studied him for a moment, then sighed, opened the book to the first page, and sat down beside the boy, like someone who understands that silence can carry reasons deeper than words. "Then let's start with greetings." In the days that followed, the mango tree became a classroom. The other children ran around laughing and shouting, but Kofi stayed put, body still, eyes sharp. He repeated difficult syllables, wrote them down carefully, and corrected his own pronunciation with a discipline that would humble most adults. Father Giacomo was puzzled by this sudden interest, but he didn't press. He had learned that some questions, if asked too early, can kill what's still blooming. So he chose to simply teach, gently, like watering a seed. "Do you have a goal with all this?" he dared to ask one afternoon. Kofi stared at the ground, drew a circle in the dirt with his finger, and replied calmly, "I just want to speak it properly, when the time comes." The priest nodded. That was enough. In the afternoons, after their impromptu lessons, Kofi returned to his chores, gathering firewood, helping carry water buckets, feeding the mission's chickens. But in everything he did, his mind was elsewhere. Every new word was a puzzle piece he was fitting together in silence. At night, lying on the thin mat borrowed from an old woman, he would whisper what he'd learned, eyes fixed on the thatched ceiling. "Sal gratia veritas," scattered words, rehearsed in the dark like a private prayer. No one knew, not even the priest. It was during one of those quiet mornings that the priest received a visit from an old friend, Kwame, a journalist now based in Lagos, working in television production. They sat beneath the shade of the chapel and spoke for a long time about the village, the mission, and the region's hardships. Then, almost absent-mindedly, the priest said, "There's a boy here unlike any I've ever known." Kwame raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean?" "He's quiet, determined. He has a strange kind of faith, but it's beautiful. And now he wants to learn Latin, with a seriousness I've never seen in a child." The journalist smiled. He'd heard similar stories, remarkable children with extraordinary stories. They had become moving episodes on Real Dreams, a popular program in Lagos that showcased impossible journeys made real in front of cameras. "Do you think he'd be willing to tell a story?" "That, I don't know," the priest replied honestly. "But if he agrees, you'll see it for yourself. There's something there." Kwame jotted down the boy's name and asked to meet him. The priest hesitated. "Just promise me one thing. Don't turn what's sacred to him into a spectacle." The journalist nodded and promised. The next day, 2 men and a woman arrived with backpacks, cameras, and wide smiles. They were sweaty, tired from the long trip, but eager. Kofi watched from a distance, arms crossed, brow furrowed. He didn't approach. It was the priest who called him over. When the boy finally sat in the chair in front of the makeshift camera, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange. "Are you Kofi?" He nodded, eyes steady. "They say you want to learn Latin." "Why?" Silence. "Is it to pray better?" "No." "To become a priest?" "No." "Then what for?" Kofi took a deep breath. He looked at the priest, then at the floor, and answered with a steady voice. "I just want to know how to use the right words. When the time comes for me to meet the Pope." The journalist smiled, surprised. The cameraman adjusted the frame. The priest closed his eyes. He understood. That very night, a message was sent from Lagos to Rome. Weeks later, when the reply came, the priest called Kofi to the altar. The mission's bells hadn't rung in months. But that day, the metallic chime echoed through the village like good news. They want to take you to Lagos, to share your story on television. Will I see the Pope? We don't know yet, but they're listening, Kofi, and that's the first step. The boy didn't smile. He simply bowed his head. There was something solemn in his silence. On the night before the trip, Kofi knelt alone before the altar cross. The chapel was dark. The candle flickered in the breeze. He didn't ask for anything. He simply repeated to himself the words he had been gathering slowly, carefully, words no one else knew, words he hoped someday would reach the ears of the one he most wished to meet. Then, silently, he stood. The first step had been taken. The heat in Lagos was different, not dry like in the village, but humid, thick, clinging to the skin. The smell of asphalt mixed with gasoline and fried food filled the air with a kind of intensity Kofi had never known. And the lights were everywhere. Street lamps, car beams, neon signs, flashing screens. Lagos was a city that never seemed to sleep. Kofi stepped out of the car, unsure where to look. People everywhere, hands pointing, voices rushing. Strangers offering him food, clothes, microphones. Everything felt like too much, too fast. But he remained quiet, holding tightly to the sleeve of Father Giacomo, who had come with him from the village. The priest tried to mask his own unease with polite smiles. But even he was overwhelmed by the noise and speed of it all. Kofi, on the other hand, had one thought: don't get lost in all of this. The next day, the Real Dreams crew set up for the interview. The makeshift studio smelled of dusty cables and old makeup. The air conditioner made a strange whirring sound, but it was the first time Kofi had ever felt cold outside the village's chilly dawns. Sitting in a chair too big for his thin frame, he stared at the floor while the team adjusted lights and microphones. The host sat across from him. She wore a colorful outfit, carefully done makeup, and a trained smile. She had done dozens of touching interviews with hopeful children, but something about this silent boy unsettled her. "Kofi, how are you feeling today?" she asked gently, trying to sound close. He shrugged, not out of rudeness. "It was just him. We're so happy to have you here. We've heard you have a special dream. Can you tell us what it is?" Kofi looked at the camera, then at the priest behind the lights, then back to the woman. "I want to see the Pope." She nodded, smiling. "And what would you like to say to him?" Kofi didn't hesitate. "I don't want to say something. I want to make a request." Her smile softened, slightly more hesitant. "Can you tell us what that request is?" "No." The silence fell over the studio like a heavy curtain. The host tried to keep the moment light, but in the background, the production team had already started to shift uncomfortably. "You don't want to share with us? Not even a little?" Kofi simply shook his head, firm, unwavering, "Only when I'm with him." The host glanced quickly at the director. The signal came. "Wrap it up." She turned back to the boy with a polite smile. "Thank him," and closed with a string of pleasant but hollow words. Backstage, the producer sighed in frustration. "We've got nothing. No hook, no soundbite." "But we have him," said the cameraman. "Look at this kid. He's not like the others." The problem is, the audience wants emotion. They want a reason. If he won't tell us the request, the story dies. Father Giacomo, listening with the quiet patience of someone who had already seen the world fail before, stepped forward. "You want a reason? Then tell his truth. Not the one he's keeping, the one that made him." 2 days later, the team pulled together the footage they filmed in the village. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They cut a short video, just 3 minutes. It opened with images of red earth, huts, and a dry well. Then came shots of Kofi walking alone, eyes always turned skyward, clutching a newspaper clipping like it held a piece of himself. The host's voice narrated in a sober tone. Kofi lost his mother as a baby. She fell ill, and there were no medicines to save her. His father died months later. Try to feed him with what little remained. Kofi was raised by his older brother, Kojo, until the age of 5, when Kojo was falsely accused of theft by foreign soldiers. He was beaten to death in front of the boy. Since then, Kofi has lived between borrowed homes, heavy chores, and dreams no one could understand. Until now. The video ended with a question. What could a boy with so little ask from the most powerful man in the Christian faith? What does Kofi have to say to the Pope? It was enough. The internet caught fire like dry grass in a storm. Let this boy meet the Pope. This needs to happen. That request might be what the world needs to hear. Even without knowing what he'll say, I'm already crying. He doesn't want fame. He just wants to be heard. Respect that. The views skyrocketed. Kofi's name spread across the country. Under pressure from the public, the network released an official statement of support. We will do everything within our power to help Kofi be received at the Vatican. And amid all of this, Kofi remained the same. That night, as the producer was flooded with calls from embassies and reporters, the priest sat beside Kofi on the edge of the hotel bed. Have you seen how people are talking about you? The boy slowly nodded, but looked confused. Does it scare you? A little. Why? Kofi took a while to answer. Because no one really understands what I feel. And still they want to hear me. That's rare. I'm afraid. I don't think the Pope will like what I have to say. He stared into nothingness as he spoke. Why don't you tell me what it is, so I can help you better? Asked the priest gently. But Kofi shook his head. No, the priest didn't push. He simply handed him the notebook with their most recent Latin lessons. It's okay if you're not ready to say it yet. But when the time comes, say everything. Don't hold back. This is a rare chance. And I'll be with you. Kofi took the notebook, flipped through the pages, ran his fingertips over the words. Thank you, Father. I promise. Then let your voice be like your soul, steady and pure. The boy closed his eyes, took a deep breath. The next day, they would leave for Rome. That night, Kofi walked a window. He looked out over the city lights. He didn't feel fear anymore. Just wait, because even at his young age, he knew what he carried wasn't just a request. It was a wound, an old one, and maybe no one would understand. The first thing Kofi felt stepping off the plane was the sharp cold of Rome. It wasn't like the dry winds of Savannah or the muggy heat of Nigeria's cities. This was European cold. Thick coats, red noses, and fast, quiet footsteps. He pulled the hood of his new sweatshirt up over his ears. The clothes still felt too big, too heavy for a body that had always fit into so little. But now he was here on the other side of the world. And even though he didn't say it aloud, he felt it deep down. He had never been closer to his destiny. Rome was a city of stone. Ancient buildings stood like silent mountains, and the church bells echoed from a time when the world moved slower. But the cars, the tourists, the flashing cameras, they reminded Kofi he was in a place where everything was seen, and where everything could be lost if he wasn't careful. The production team brought them to a modest hotel a few minutes from the Vatican. It was clean, warm, with tall windows that looked out over domes and towers Kofi had only seen in books. He would lean out the window for long minutes, watching rooftops, almost as if expecting someone away from above. Father Giacomo stayed close, always trying to balance protection with freedom. Rome is beautiful, but intense, he warned. Don't lose your calm. I didn't come for Rome, Kofi replied, eyes still fixed on the view. The next day, they took a walk around St. Peter's Square. Kofi didn't know how to describe what he felt when he saw the towering colonnades, like open arms, and the basilica shining in the gray sky. He didn't run, didn't shout. He just walked slowly, looking up like he always did. And while tourists laughed and snapped photos around him, Kofi seemed to exist in another time, a time where the stones could speak. Are you okay? The priest asked. I thought I'd shake, he said softly, but inside, I'm just quiet. That afternoon, Kofi had his first official commitment, a guided visit alongside other children invited by the foundation organizing the trip. Among them were ambassadors' children, students from Catholic schools, and youth from European charity programs. He knew he was the exception, and he felt it within minutes. The others began to approach him. A French girl asked where he was from. An Italian boy wanted to know if he'd ever seen a lion. A nun tried translating with gestures and warm smiles. Kofi responded with his eyes, with nods, but avoided speaking. He knew anything said could be turned into a spectacle. Meanwhile, the show's cameras filmed from a distance. The producer had been clear. No pressure, no interference. Just capture the moment. But with Kofi, moments didn't come easily. He didn't pose, didn't smile on cue. He just observed, with that quiet presence that had become his signature. During dinner, something shifted. They were seated in an old hall with arched ceilings, dim yellow lights, and the smell of soup in the air. One of the event security guards, tall, white, bald, in a dark uniform, approached to give an update on schedules. As soon as Kofi saw him, he stopped chewing. His eyes locked on the uniform. His chest tightened. For a second, he was 5 years old again. He saw his brother. He heard the screams, and he froze. Are you all right? The priest asked, noticing the shift. Kofi didn't answer. He pushed his chair back slowly and walked out of the hall. He was breathing heavily. His hand gripped his sweatshirt over his chest. The priest followed and found Kofi near the emergency exit, leaning against the wall. Kofi, his eyes were shut, fighting back tears. It's just, he whispered, the uniform, the way he walked. I know. For a second, I thought it was the same look. But it wasn't. The boy nodded. And then, finally, he spoke with a steady voice. I'm okay. That night, the priest found him in the hotel room, whispering words under his breath. Never full sentences, just scattered words, as if he were rehearsing steps for a leap only he could see. "Are you still sure?" the priest asked. Kofi stopped, looked at him and nodded slowly. "I came all this way for this." Outside, the production crew was working hard to secure a special seat for Kofi during the upcoming papal audience scheduled in 2 days. There was still no confirmation whether he would be formally introduced to the Pope, but the requests had been submitted, and now the internet was applying its own pressure. Thousands were following the journey. Messages flooded in from around the world. "This boy has something important to say. Let him be heard." It's not just about faith. It's about dignity. The Vatican has always remained silent, but at that moment, even silence seemed to be listening. The next morning, Kofi woke before the sun. He went to the hotel window, knelt on the carpet, and stayed there for a long while. To anyone looking in, it would seem like just a boy praying. But in that position, he wasn't asking for anything. He was rehearsing, visualizing, imagining every second of the moment that hadn't yet happened, but had been calling to him for longer than anyone knew, because now it was close. And he knew when the moment came, even if the world went quiet, his voice would be heard. The next day dawned gray. The Roman sky, usually soft blue streaked with sunlight, now hung heavy over the city like a thick veil. Even inside the hotel, the air felt dense. Kofi felt strange in his body. Not sick, not feverish. More like something inside him wanted to stop. As if after all the walking, something whispered, "This is far enough." He was quieter than usual. At breakfast, he barely touched his food. He stared at the half-eaten bread on his plate, the cooling milk in a white cup, and felt a knot rising in his throat, like even swallowing had become difficult. Father Giacomo noticed. "Are you nervous?" The boy shook his head, then whispered, "I'm scared. Of the Pope, of myself." The priest didn't understand right away, but he respected the silence that followed. He knew that when words truly needed to come out, they would. That afternoon, they took Kofi to St. Peter's Square for a walkthrough. Just a preview. Nothing official. But he knew, in 2 days, the Pope would stand right at that central point, blessing thousands. As he stepped onto the square again, Kofi felt something different. The ground seemed harder, as if it were resisting his steps. He walked slowly, his body hunched inside his coat. The square was nearly empty, bordered by temporary fences and scattered tourists. Still, he looked around, almost expecting someone to yell that he didn't belong there. As they neared the basilica's steps, an event security officer approached. Dark uniform, tall frame, brisk walk. He was simply explaining logistics, where guests would be seated, the Pope's route, where the cordons would go, standard procedure. But for Kofi, it wasn't. He froze as the man neared. The priest's voice, the surroundings, all blurred. Sound became a buzz. Images distorted. The security guard's footsteps, firm, sharp, confident, triggered something old. A sound he knew. A sound that once came right before pain. "Kofi," the priest called. But it was too late. The boy took 2 steps back, then turned and ran. He didn't get far. He crouched behind one of the massive columns and sat on the cold ground, knees pulled to his chest. The world was spinning. His chest tightened. His throat burned. Father Giacomo came soon after and sat beside him in silence. Minutes passed before Kofi spoke. He walked the same way. I thought he was going to hit me. He wasn't, but I thought he would." The priest nodded, understanding more with his eyes than words. "Sometimes," he said softly, "we carry a memory so strong it jumps ahead of reality. Even when we're safe, the memory still screams danger." Kofi cried without a sound. Just tears, pure and stubborn. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. "You already are. But what if I freeze when it counts?" "Freezing is human, but you won't be alone." The boy wiped his face with the sleeve of his thick coat. "I'm nobody." The priest turned to him, firm. Don't ever say that again. You are somebody with something to say, and the world is waiting to hear it, even if you speak only with your eyes. That night, Kofi didn't eat. He stayed in bed, wrapped in blankets, staring at the white ceiling like it held something hidden. The priest brought him a cup of tea, left it by the bed, and sat in the armchair, reading silently. I thought about going back, Kofi confessed, not looking at him. I know. I don't want to be seen as just a black boy with a sad story. You are so much more than that. Kofi turned to face the wall. And what if no one understands what I want to say? The priest closed the book gently. If you speak with truth, someone will. Maybe not everyone, but someone will. Hours later, deep in the night, Kofi got up quietly. He grabbed his notebook filled with Latin phrases and knelt by the window. Outside, Rome slept, the basilica's dome barely visible in the shadows. But he knew it was there. He knew the Pope was asleep, too, and that soon they would meet. He didn't pray, didn't rehearse. He just wrote one final word, folded the page, tucked it into his coat pocket, and lay back down with his eyes still open, staring into the dark. On the other side of the wall, the priest prayed, not that everything would go right, but that even if it didn't, the boy wouldn't lose what carried him forward. Because sometimes, even when everything fails, faith is what keeps us standing. The next day, the badges arrived. Special entrance to the audience. Reserved seating. Time confirmed. It was happening, and there were only 24 hours left. They woke before the sky turned. The room still wrapped in shadows. The muffled sound of the city starting to breathe outside. But inside, Kofi was already up, sitting at the edge of the bed, silent. The priest watched quietly. Did you sleep at all? He asked. Kofi gave the faintest shake of his head. Are you ready? He didn't reply, just sat there, eyes fixed on the floor, fingers gripping the edge of his coat, like they were holding the whole world inside it. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was deeper. The kind of silence that comes after the soul has said everything it needed to itself, and now was ready to speak it out loud. In the hotel lobby, the team was already waiting, cameras at a respectful distance, producers pacing, whispering instructions. The reporter clipped a microphone to Kofi's coat lapel. You okay? She asked gently. He nodded. We won't interfere. Today is about you. He looked at her for a second, then looked away. Not distrust. Focus. The car carried them through Rome's cold streets in silence, winding through narrow alleys and wide avenues until they turned a corner. And there it was, St. Peter's Square. Thousands were already gathered, held back by security fences. Some prayed. Others smiled. Many held flags, rosaries, or religious images. It looked like a crowd waiting for a miracle. But Kofi didn't see the crowd. He only saw the path. They entered through a side access for invited guests. His name was on the list. His badge scanned twice. No surprise. No fake smiles. Just another guest. But he knew he wasn't. They were taken to a section near the central aisle, where the Pope's small vehicle would pass. The sun had begun to break through the clouds, casting golden rays over the steps of the basilica. The altar stood empty, the rows of chairs like guardians of an ancient secret. Father Giacomo rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. When he comes, breathe, wait for the moment, do it your way. Kofi didn't reply. In his coat pocket, the folded piece of paper burned like fire. Suddenly, the crowd's hum grew louder, like a wave approaching not in haste, but with weight. The Pope was coming. The Pope mobile appeared in the distance, surrounded by security, waving hands, tears, camera flashes. People pressed forward, many crying, some lifting children like offerings of faith. It was a scene of devotion and longing like few others on earth. And there stood Kofi, watching, not with the eyes of a worshiper, but with the eyes of someone on a mission. As the white vehicle neared their section, the priest looked at him, silently asking, Now? Kofi nodded, took one step forward, another, and then he knelt. The Pope passed right by him, just a few feet away. But in that moment, he didn't see the boy. He was greeting a group to the left, giving quick blessings, touching heads, smiling with serene grace. It wasn't until the vehicle came to a stop, a few yards ahead, that one of the guards noticed a boy kneeling on the cold stone ground, his coat far too thin for the morning chill. "Eh!" The guard called softly, walking toward him. "Come on, kid, stand up." Kofi didn't move. The guard reached out his hand to lift him. That's when the Pope, already standing in the Pope mobile, noticed a commotion. He raised his hand slightly, signaling calm. "Lasciatello," he said in Italian. "Let him be." The guard paused, stepped back, and the Pope stepped down. Silence. A silence that rippled across St. Peter's Square like a fresh breeze. He walked slowly toward the boy and stood before him. "Why are you crying, my son?" he asked gently. Kofi looked up slowly. His lashes were wet, his face still solemn. The paper clenched tightly in his hand. But he didn't speak. Not yet. He simply looked into the Pope's eyes, searching before anything else to be seen. The Pope knelt slowly to meet him at eye level. The two remained there, face to face. The cameras recorded from afar. The production crew trembled. No one knew what would happen next. Not the priest, not the reporters, not the world. Only Kofi. He opened his hand carefully. The paper was crumpled slightly. He looked at it one last time, then tucked it back into his coat pocket. He took a breath, and then he prepared to speak. Time seemed to freeze. The crowd still murmured in the background, but there, in the center of St. Peter's Square, silence reigned. The Pope, kneeling before a black boy with trembling hands and a steady gaze, waited for his words. "Why are you crying, my son?" Kofi opened his mouth, and for a moment, nothing came out. The cold stung his bones. His eyes brimmed with tears. His hands were damp with sweat despite the icy air. He felt the weight of everything. The past, the journey, the ones left behind, the ones who never would be heard. And still, he was there. It was time. He took a deep breath. The crowd watched. The priest, from a distance, fought back tears. The Pope waited patiently. And then, in a voice soft but unwavering, Kofi spoke. At first, in silence, mouthing the words. Then, with courage, the phrase he had rehearsed for a year. The one he whispered every night, lying on the floor. The one he had written down and tucked away like a treasure. He spoke it in full. Renunciate ut primum pontificemeum colorum habeamus. The Pope's brow furrowed slightly, surprised. His eyes narrowed, trying to process the words. He quietly repeated the phrase to himself, confirming he had heard it right. The guards glanced at one another. One whispered to the other. No one fully understood. Some priests in the distance tried to decipher it, but there was no official translation, only the echo of the words lingering in the air. Then the Pope looked into Kofi's eyes. "Do you know what you're asking of me?" Kofi nodded. No smile, no hesitation. The Pope closed his eyes for a moment. The morning breeze rustled his white robes. When he opened them again, his face was calm, but in his eyes something shimmered, a trace of moisture, a heavy silence. He didn't respond with words. He simply reached out, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and embraced him. The crowd stirred in low murmurs, but still unsure what had just happened. The Pope looked up and signaled for everyone to keep their distance. Then he leaned down and whispered something into Kofi's ear. Kofi listened, and something inside him melted, like ice thawing from the inside out. It wasn't what he hoped to hear, nor what he feared. It was simply human. The Pope stepped away, returned to the steps of the altar, and resumed his place for the ceremony. And Kofi remained, still kneeling, in silence. The priest joined him moments later, kneeling beside him. "Did he hear you?" Kofi nodded, tears filling his eyes. "What did he say?" The boy stared at the horizon. that some changes begin in silence. The production team had no clean audio. The cameras captured the moment, but the Latin phrase wasn't fully understood. In the control room, technicians scrambled, adjusting levels, lip reading, isolating sounds. Nothing. In the days that followed, the world would only see the gesture. A boy kneeling, the Pope embracing him, their shared gaze, and then the audience proceeding as if nothing had happened. But something had. The headlines followed. What did the African boy say to the Pope? Why was the Holy Father so moved? Request or prophecy? Social media lit up with debate. Theories emerged. Speculations. But no one knew for sure. And Kofi spoke to no one, only to the priest. Will you tell? No, not ever. Kofi looked at him with the calm of someone who had done exactly what they came to do. It's been said. That's enough. They returned to the hotel by late afternoon. Rome was quiet. The air felt clean. Kofi walked slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes to the ground. In his coat pocket, the paper with the phrase still rested. But now, he no longer needed it. That night, lying in bed, Kofi didn't write. He didn't rehearse. He didn't look at the sky. He simply slept, like he hadn't in a very, very long time. At the Vatican, the Pope remained quiet as well. Some cardinals asked. Journalists pushed. But he, like the boy, didn't explain. He simply said, God hears even the smallest voices. And while the world tried to piece together what had been spoken in that sacred moment, only two people truly knew, and neither seemed in any rush to explain. The next morning, the world woke with questions. News outlets ran headlines that blended all with confusion. The mysterious Latin phrase spoken to the Pope by African child. Official translation, renounce that we may have the color of my first Pope. Confusing or prophetic, the plea of a forgotten generation. The phrase, repeated in newspapers and across social media, puzzled many. In English, it read, renounce that we may have the color of my first Pope. It sounded awkward, strange. Some Latin scholars laughed at the grammar. Others tried to interpret it symbolically. Some said it was nonsense, a child mistake. But others saw more. A tearful nun, interviewed on European television, said, sometimes children speak in the language of the soul, and that the Pope understands better than any translator. Kofi gave no interviews, held no press conferences. The crew respected his wishes. He asked to stay silent, and silence, in that moment, spoke louder than anything else. At the hotel, Kofi spent his last day with the priest. They walked through quieter streets, visited an old church, lit a candle. And now, the priest asked. Kofi looked at the altar before him. The flame flickered, and the stained glass windows cast colorful light across the stone floor. Now I know what I want to be. What? A priest. The priest smiled, surprised, but not entirely. Why? Because I want to continue what started here. Do you think you can? Kofi turned to him, eyes steady. I don't know, but I want to try. And maybe one day, I'll be the one who listens from a place no one else wants to hear. At the airport, just before departure, a reporter from the show tried one last time to get the answer. Kofi, now that it's all over, do you want to tell us what you really said to the Pope? He looked at her, smiled. He understood. Do you think the world did? Kofi took a deep breath. The world doesn't always understand when truth comes from someone small. You mean a child? Someone like me. And he walked toward the gate, without looking back. The full video of the encounter aired that same week. The editing respected the silence, the looks, the exact moment when the Pope touched Kofi's shoulder and embraced him. It was simple. No dramatic cuts, no heavy music, but it was enough to move thousands. In the comments, questions and hopes blended together. He's going to be Pope one day. Just wait. Why have we never had a black pope? Why? What did that man hear that no one else could? I didn't understand it, but I felt it. Kofi returned to Nigeria, different. He was no longer the boy who stared at the sky. Now, he wanted to become the bridge between heaven and earth. He went back to the mission, kept studying, asked for more books, more time with the priest, more Latin. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted to be ready. He wanted to deserve it. And deep down, he knew the phrase that left his lips might never make sense to the world. It might always be mistranslated, misunderstood, but the Pope heard it, and he listened with his eyes. And that was enough for Kofi. In the halls of the Vatican, the matter faded over time. Nothing was officially recorded. No public statements were made. No answers were given. But those who were close remembered the Pope's face that day, the slight tremble in his hands, the pause in his breath, the weight of that embrace. Years later, when Kofi wrote his first homily as a seminarian, he began with a line he had learned in silence. Some voices don't shout, but they echo for generations. And at the end, he added only one question. Is the world ready to hear what it never wanted to listen to? Are we? Did the Pope truly understand? Could a poor, orphaned black boy from a forgotten Nigerian village one day become the highest leader of the Catholic Church? Will we ever see a Pope the color of Kofi? And more than that, why haven't we already? If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. We have many more emotional stories, real or inspired, that reveal hidden truths and inspire deep reflection. Watch the other videos here on the channel, because sometimes, in the middle of so many voices, it's the quietest one that carries the answer.